Kind of.
Good evening. My name is Tim Markle. I'm director of the Youth Health Transition Initiative, and this is Transition Talks Tuesdays. This fall sessions are being brought by collaboration and partnership with the Children's Resource Center South and the three Autism Society affiliates of Wisconsin. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Partners to a Full Life, learning about the independent living centers and the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. We know that Wisconsin is rich in advocacy organizations who are here to support people with disabilities throughout the lifespan. So we hope that you will learn how to make important connections for your students and your children now, but also as they grow up to become adults. So thank you both. Jeremy is here from Board for People with Developmental Disability and Jason from Independent Living Centers. If you both just want to introduce yourselves really quickly and then take it away, virtual arm wrestle, if you want to see who goes first. We'll decide who's the winner. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. We're both really excited to be here, representing our organizations. My name is Jason Glozier, and I'm the director of the Wisconsin Coalition of Independent Living Centers. I have a pretty extensive background in disability rights and services and disability justice, and I bring a lifelong advocacy focus to the work that the independent living centers do.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Gundlach. I'm the communications director for the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. And very similar to Jason, I've been at the board for just about 10 years, and prior to that, I have a lifetime of experience. My oldest sibling has cerebral palsy, and so from a very young age, got involved with advocacy and just kind of understanding transition and all of those things. Tim and I actually years ago helped run the YIPPY program, the Youth in Partnership Parents for Empowerment, which was a transition program that the state ran for parents and youth with disabilities. So the parents would get similar information, but a little bit more geared towards parents. And so yeah, my start was in transition, and then have moved into more advocacy at BPDD. So um, we do have a small-ish group, and so I do have some PowerPoint slides. I can throw them up because I just realized there are pictures of our board, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But I also sent these to Tim, and so he can send them out. And mostly there's some contact information on there and a brief description of some of our projects and programs that you and your families could possibly get involved in. So give me 1 second and I will share those. And I'm just going to be kind of breezing through these slides just because they're an overview, and because we have a small enough group, if people have questions, I will try to keep an eye on chat, but also just feel free to pop in. I think that's totally fine. I don't know. Not everybody likes that, but I think it's wonderful just to have a conversation. So, um, the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, we just celebrated our 50-year anniversary like 2 years ago, so uh, pretty quickly. But we are a part of a nationwide, right? Every state and territory has a DD council. We're called a board, and some of the other states and territories have a little bit different names, but that's just because of how said state or territory labels a board or a council, right? So it's just a definition. We all are charged by the federal government and funded by the federal government to work on public policy and advocacy. So um, it's kind of a mouthful of a name, right? The Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, but it's very descriptive of what we are. And so we here we go. This is the picture is getting a little bit older, but this is a picture of our staff and board from one of our retreats probably a year or two ago. Everyone having a wonderful time. It's summer, beautiful weather. It's a good thing to look at now, especially with it being cold and everything. And I just love that our board is, very tight knit. Everyone gets along, having a wonderful time up. We're a little bit up north in this picture. So, why DD councils? This was part of federal legislation that was passed in 1970. It took a couple years to get the state law passed to establish our board or council, and so that's why our 50 year was in 2022. But as you can see, our mission statement, the board is dedicated to increasing self-determination, independence, productivity, integration, and inclusion of people with disabilities. This is really our driving force. In the DD Act, there's a whole bunch of specifics on deliverables and things that we have to work on, but essentially all of our projects, all of our funding, everything that we do goes towards this. We want people with disabilities to be part of their communities and have an active voice in everything, right? In public policy, in how they want to live their life, and just advocating for their needs and anyone else's needs. So for anyone who's into a little bit more of the wonky side of things, this is the specific bill, and you can go look it up and read a little bit more about it, but I will just kind of give a brief overview of how we operate. But there is a very long federal bill or law that you can read if you are interested. And then here's the state statute. Because like I said, we were, established, there was a federal law and then a state law. So we are made up of board members from around the state who are volunteer board members, and they're appointed by the office of the governor. So what happens is somebody can apply to be on a board. I think there's over like 500 boards for the state of Wisconsin that just are all in some way or another advisory for the governor or the legislature. And so that's kind of where we fit in. And so our board members is our board. Our staff are here to carry out whatever they want to work on. And some of those projects we'll get into in a little bit. I just wanted to kind of breeze through exactly who we are and where we come from. And so, like I said, some of the more specifics were charged with identifying the most pressing needs of people with developmental disabilities. And really how we do that, it's not like staff are coming in and saying this is, the most pressing issue. Our board runs the show. So we are right now in the process of gearing up for our new 5-year state plan. Our board members who are people with disabilities, family members, and then a mixture of state agency reps and providers. But really, over 60% of our board is people with disabilities and their family members. And then that last 40% is mostly a mixture of that, once again, people with disabilities and family members. So we really, have them lead everything that we do. And then for additional input, we always go around the state. We hold listening sessions. We have board members and staff who sit on other state boards who are just involved in their communities. And that's kind of how we get a sense of what is needed around the state. And that's how we advise the legislature and the governor. Let's see, I see something in the chat. Let me just see. Do we advocate only on broader issues within the state or issues that are affecting someone personally? What kind of support would be provided if done on a personal basis? That is a wonderful question. So we are charged with public policy and statewide advocacy. And so this is a question that I get almost every time I do this. And so we are different in the sense of some advocacy organizations where if you have, say, a problem with your IEP, or if, talking more transition, if you're transitioning from children's waiver to an adult waiver for long-term care supports and you want someone to come help you with that, we are not the organization for that. We are solely here looking for systemic change and public policy change. And so when we say advocacy, we mean we're looking for those broader systemic issues that we can do some grassroots organizing to get people together. So wonderful question. Thank you. Any other questions? I will just keep an eye out. So if you throw it in chat, I'll be able to snag it. Couple quick things. We are a nonpartisan agency, which means we're not liberal, we're not conservative, we don't work just with the Republicans or the Democrats. We believe, similar to what's on your screen, disability is a natural part of the human experience, and disability rights are human rights. And so we work with all legislators, and regardless of who the governor is, that's who appoints our board, and we will be working with them regardless of who it is. And so that's another question that I get a lot, is how do we fit into the political spectrum of things? And pretty much just like that. We're nonpartisan. We are just looking to make Wisconsin as good of a place as possible for people with disabilities and their family members. And we believe that when you do that, it makes it a better place for everyone who lives here. Here we go. So once again, I will breeze through some of this, but I did send it to Tim. This is more on some of the wonkier side of things for anyone who's interested in public policy. There is a federal definition on what a developmental disability is and a state definition for what a developmental disability is. They're very similar. If anyone wants to talk about it, I'm sure you're more than welcome to contact me, or you can contact Tim or Jason. I'm sure either one of us would love to talk to you about that, especially because really this matters as far as transitioning into adult programs for long-term care and things like that. So when we were created, we were not created just ourselves. We have some partners, and every DD council also has these partners. So the UCEDS, or the University Centers for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, that is going to be the Wiseman Center. And that's where the UCED is. They usually run very similar, right? They're connected to a state university. They do lots of research, and they kind of have that academia side of things. And then the protection and advocacy. Some of you may have heard of Disability Rights Wisconsin. That is our PNA. They're one of our partners, both the UCED or Wiseman and Disability Rights Wisconsin, the PNA, have mandatory board members on our board because we work together, right? So kind of the way I always describe this working is, while the UCEDs and the PNAs will work on public policy, we will use things to work together in, we are supposed to be somewhat the leaders in that, between this triad, or however you want to look at it. And so the PNA is set up a little bit different because they have attorneys on staff, and they are not a state agency, because if something were to ever come up and they were needing to sue the state government or something, that would be a conflict of interest. And so that, mixed in with all the wonderful research and clinics and all of the things that happen at Wiseman, we kind of take that to inform our public policy, right? So we get lots of good info from both of them, both the PNAs talking about cases that they get, continuing systemic issues that they see in their work, same with the UCEDs, and then we all work together. But because we are part of state government in a very specific way, to kind of lead that charge. This is what I was talking about before. Our board is made up of volunteer board members. It has to be, and this is in the DD Act, that federal law. A third have to be people with developmental disabilities, a third have to be parents, and then the remaining third have to be a mix of people with disabilities and their parents. And then these are some of the folks that are required. We have to have someone from like I said, the protection and advocacy, the you said, and then some of the other larger state agencies. Department of Public Instruction, they run education, and so it's wonderful having a representative on there, because if we have any education issues that we're working on, we have someone who can possibly make change and get us answers. Same with the workforce development and the Department of Health Services. I kind of mentioned this every 5 years. Really, it's a little bit, it takes us a year or so to get it put together, but we come up with a new state plan. And like I said, that really drives what we're working on. Obviously, there are things that come up. So for instance, we're coming around to there will be more state budget stuff going on. And while we operate as a state, it's a biennial budget, we still work on that, even though it's maybe not a specific thing in our state plan, right? Like while we have these guiding things in our 5 year state plan, things do come up. In the world of public policy, there are a lot of things that we honestly will oppose, right? It's not all just proposing things for change. It's if laws come up and people aren't thinking of how it's going to affect folks with disabilities or their family members, we will kind of show up and say, hey, you haven't thought of how this will affect people with disabilities. Some of the more recent ones are uh, over the last handful of years, there have been quite a few bills that have been proposed around ballot boxes and voting rights in general. And a lot of those people with disabilities just kind of weren't taken into account for that. And so it was something where we right away were like, okay, if someone can't help you turn in your ballot, what if someone doesn't have the capability of holding a ballot, right? And so just things like that, right? It's not all us trying to promote good things. Some of it is us also stepping in to say, hey, this is going to have a negative effect on this population. Approaches we cannot use. So public policy, we are nonpartisan. You will not see us as a board, as staff protesting things, right? If we oppose something, we are going to show up for a public hearing. We are going to put out a press release, right? We are going to do those sorts of things. We are not going to get signs and holler outside of the Capitol. Lawsuits, once again, it's just not something we can do. It's why the protection and advocacy group has those attorneys on staff, because if, something ever needed to happen, they would kind of take that on. Direct service provision. So this is kind of the question that came up before. We are looking at systems change, and so we're not allowed legally to do any sort of direct service. So we have some small grants that I'll get to shortly, and those can't be used to, get someone a new handicap accessible lift or something like that, because that counts as a direct service. And then lobbying. So this can get kind of confusing because we do a lot of education around certain things for politicians. Uh, and people will say, well, how is that not lobbying? And it is different, right? As a lobbyist, you have to register, you get paid to do it. We get salaries, right? But it is just education. We're not lobbying for specific things. It's just educating legislators on what is best for people with disabilities. This is just a quick overview of our current state plan. It's much more in depth than this. This is just kind of the plain language, easy to view. And I'm happy to send this over to Tim if anyone is interested. And here we go. So some of our projects, I am hoping that some of y'all have heard about at least one or two of these. We do a lot of work around the state. Yeah, so partners in policy making. This is a program where we work with people with disabilities and their family members or just family members, right? You don't have to go through with, like, say, your sibling or your child with a disability, on how to get involved with politics, right? I think a lot of folks with disabilities and their family members come face to face with a lot of government programs, and it's easy to kind of miss the connection in getting involved politically and telling your story in a way that makes sense public policy wise, just because public policy, it sounds like this scary thing, and like you have to have a degree in it in order to make change. And it's not true, really. The majority of bills that are introduced are from people who live in a district that have an issue. And so it's so important for people to tell their stories and get involved. And this program just does that. It helps people to learn how to tell their story, learn a little bit more about the political system, and from a nonpartisan viewpoint also. Everything we do is nonpartisan, and so it's just a wonderful way to learn how to get involved. Yeah. Self-Determination Conference. This is our biggest event of the year. It's really a fun conference. I'm clearly biased because I have been working for this organization for like 10 years, but it's just a lot of fun. And not to mention, it's wonderful as far as resources. It's every October, and there are scholarships. If so your children's waiver or long-term care can help pay for it. Otherwise, there are scholarships to make it a much more affordable thing. Not that it's crazy expensive, especially for someone with a disability or a family member. But it is at the Kalahari and the Dells, and so some of that is a little bit expensive, but you also don't have to stay there. I sometimes will drive back and forth, but it's wonderful. All of the sessions are at least co-presented by someone with a disability. And so it's great information on how to use your support programs to lead the best life that you can. And it's just wonderful. It's people making friends, it's people finding out what they want to do with their lives. And I love it. Sparks mini grants. These grants will start coming out this spring or early summer. And really, they're small grants. They're $500 to $5,000. And the idea is, how can we help uh, uh, small groups of people make their communities um, more inclusive. And so we specifically keep this a little bit vague because we want people to be very creative with these. And so we've had people use this to organize to get an accessible park put in, to do some events that uh, bring awareness to a lack of transportation, right? Like, I can think of so many of these. Um, we recently have had a couple of um, summer camps use them as a way to just figure out how to make their existing stuff more accessible for people with disabilities, which I think is wonderful. It's the exact point of what these are. Supported decision making. This is something that hopefully all of y'all have heard about, especially being that you are interested in transition. Support decision making is what we kind of refer to as the least restrictive decision making. So you could try this before going to guardianship. It's a way to support people to make decisions on their own. If someone is already under guardianship, they can still use this and be part of making those decisions. There's no transfer of rights. It's a wonderful thing. If you have more questions, please reach out to myself. Tim is also very knowledgeable about this, so either one of us, feel free to reach out to. A couple of these I don't want to go over on my time. I do want to be respectful, so I'll try to wrap this up. Um, Partners with Business. This is a law that we passed. It helps businesses get a little bit of funding to help train and retain employees with disabilities. Take your legislator to work. That's exactly what it sounds like. We want legislators to know that it's good for people with disabilities to be working. So we are a place where if you want to do this, we will hook you up with your legislator if they're willing, right? Like if they want to, we will help get them to your job so that they can kind of shadow you for a day. Youth Leadership Forum. This is one that if you have transition aged youth, please check this out. It's wonderful. It is a week-long experience in Madison at Edgewood College. The youth come learn about job skills, politics, disability disclosure, advocacy, all of the things that, would count as a leadership exercise for a week, but it's specific around youth with disabilities. It's a wonderful experience. We'll have applications for that coming up soon in the year. So once again, Tim can share my contact info or feel free to reach out to myself or Tim about that. Living Well. Oh, this is a project that's almost done, but there's more info on our website. It's about reducing abuse and neglect for people with disabilities and just overall keeping people connected. Pardon me. The Disability Vote Coalition, like I said, we're nonpartisan. We just want people with disabilities to know their rights and use their rights. So, how do you ask questions to a candidate that will get to the root of disability issues, things like that. Sorry, just checking the chat. Self-Determination YouTube channel. This is a YouTube channel that's for people with disabilities by people with disabilities. There are probably hundreds of videos of just people hanging, talking about whatever is important to them. They're lovely videos. They're very well done. I would highly recommend checking it out. And then the Coalition on Lead Emergency. This is something that is a project that is just finishing, but as far as our funding of it, but they have secured their own funding and they are continuing their wonderful work. So I'm going to stop sharing because I want to change things over and give Jason his spotlight. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any point. And I would love to set up a time to chat, or if you just have a question, I can obviously just get back to you on email. But yeah, Tim, thank you so much for having me. I can hang around for a little bit, but I do have to get going pretty quick here. So
And again, if you have questions that come up later for Jeremy, he's got his email into the chat, or just let me know and I can connect you with him. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for being here. Appreciate it. Appreciate the work that the board does.
Yep.
Love how it is led by the people that it is supposed to be led by. So that's really cool. Jason, thanks so much for being here. Tell us about the Independent Living Center.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. So I'm here representing Wisconsin's Independent Living Centers and the broader Wisconsin Independent Living Network. Jeremy talked a lot about their work that they do on a systemic level, and we similarly are mandated by federal law. However, we aren't in the DD Act. We are housed within the context of the Rehabilitation Act, of now the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act, WIOA. And that's really valuable to think about because when they were drafting the Rehabilitation Act and creating organizations like Rehab Services and DVR and programs to help people become employed after they graduate high school, they also recognized that disability systems are really difficult to navigate. And at the time, the director of the Rehab Services Administration was an individual named Ed Roberts, who was the founder of the independent living philosophy. And this is where so much of our philosophy around disability-led culture comes from. Ed Roberts was running an independent living center in Berkeley. They were providing core services to the community that people with disabilities felt like they needed to have to be able to succeed in the everyday world. Those original four core services are information and referral, individual and systems advocacy. So, unlike the board, who only does systemic advocacy, independent living centers will help assist people on the individual level for advocacy as well. That's where some of that support around things like IEP development come in, around transitions from youth services to long-term care systems, around the transition from education to employment. We have staff at our centers who are well trained and well versed in a variety of disability rights laws. They also decided that people needed access to independent living skills development. This was before this was a common Medicaid service, but really figuring out how to navigate things and how to live independently in a community and in an environment that may not be entirely accessible. Um, they developed in the 1970s. And then the final one is peer support, because people recognized that they needed to have community in order to really be successful. So those were the foundational principles of independent living centers. Like the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, independent living centers are mandated and exist in all 50 states. They exist in every territory. And in addition, there's a broader network. So in the 90s, the federal government decided that in addition to centers that provided direct services, there needed to be the establishment of something called a state independent living council. And that is that consumer-led organization, similar to BPDD, that guides the planning and the practice of independent living centers. We just got done completing our state plan for independent living, which they're responsible for. Tyler Wilcox, who some of you may or may not know, is their director. They are an independent organization, so they are not a government entity, even though they are a governor-appointed board, which is an interesting construct. And because they have that autonomy, they work as part of a broader network that we've established called the Wisconsin Independent Living Network. This network is comprised of Wisconsin's 8 centers, which provide those core services, as well as some fee-for-service services, some different contract services, a whole host of things. The planning part under the council, and then the advocacy component of it, which is a large part of my position. Back in the 90s, all 8 independent living centers felt that they were stronger together and took a grassroots approach of creating a coalition. They developed the Wisconsin Coalition of Independent Living Centers, which is the organization I run. My board is made up of each of those independent living centers. They have 2 representatives who represent their interests. Why this is important is because under the Rehabilitation Act, independent living centers have to have a majority of their board be people with disabilities, a majority of their management be people with disabilities, and a majority of their staff be people with disabilities. And they're the only organizations that are mandated to have such a significant level of disability leadership because they wanted to keep it pure and consumer led. So all the organizations that inform my work are informed by people with disabilities at every level, as well as at the community level. We conduct an advocacy survey during the duration of the state plan for independent living and ask people in the community what their most significant barriers are to living independently. We have about 13 different categories on there, and that informs our advocacy priorities. So we just completed a state plan for independent living. We changed our advocacy priorities a little bit, and stepped away from doing advocacy around mental health and substance use, and have chosen over the next 3 years to focus on housing advocacy in addition to transportation and long-term care. Those were the three topics that rose to the top of our 3-year survey about what people's priorities were. So, unlike the board, I have the role of being a lobbyist. And that's one of the key things I do on behalf of advocacy and services for the independent living centers. I can go and have those direct conversations with the legislature about what we're hearing from the public, about what our priorities are, and about what our needs are. In addition, I conduct a pretty significant amount of the network's statewide advocacy efforts and serve along with the director and other staff of the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities on a whole bunch of other state agencies. Um, and one of the things that I think I will really stress is the importance of people getting involved in those state boards. Jeremy talked about being able to go and apply to 500 some boards. There are a bunch of fantastic, interesting things, and a lot of them need disability representation because there isn't a lot of disability representation on boards that make significant decisions. Um, Within the context of our state plan for independent living, we're really looking in the next 3 years at getting back to the root and key core services that independent living centers provide and focusing on that advocacy. When we got moved over to the administration on community living and put under WIOA, we also inherited a fifth core service, which centers had been conducting pretty much the entire time they've been around, but now it was a codified thing they had to do. And this was a focus on post-secondary transition and institutional transition and diversion. So getting people out of nursing homes and back into the community, or helping people who have graduated high school learn how to and become employed independently with necessary supports in place. That is something that we're obligated to do. We've been doing it for a really long time, but it's really exciting to have that recognized because centers are the only federally mandated organizations that are required to do that kind of transition work. It helps to fulfill a significant gap in partnerships because unlike the divide between the adult long-term care system and employment system and the children's services system, independent living centers work throughout the lifespan. So you can work with an independent living center when you're first becoming a parent who has a child with a disability and learning how to navigate resources, learning how to get support and advocacy through the IEP process, getting that wraparound service and thinking about how you can get access to what you're entitled to in that transition from educational services to adult employment services. I've seen more times than not a sort of cold handoff between the education system and the DVR system that leaves a lot of people not really understanding how to leverage them and use them effectively. We really want to get back to supporting the community in being able to live independently within the community of their choice. So I really love conversation, and I'm going to stop there and really ask you all, what are some of the issues that you've heard about in your community? And what are some of the things that you might be interested in getting involved in?
We're a small enough group. Please feel free to go ahead, take yourself off mute. If we got two of you fighting, then I'll decide who goes first. But please, let's have a conversation tonight. What are some of those issues? What are you hearing? And what are you facing? Or put it in the chat and I'll be more than happy to repeat it. Michelle?
I've always got questions.
I was counting on it, Michelle.
So I'm not like, I know there's a lot of broad issues out there, but what about the more personal ones that people are dealing with that are unique and don't get a lot of attention but deserve that attention? Where do you, because these agencies like yours and BPD, they don't, kind of provide advocacy for that kind of stuff. So where would you say a person should go for that kind of thing when it happens?
I mean, without knowing specifics, and I don't want to get into specifics in this forum, it's really hard to say where people would go. Where independent living centers play a role is helping people understand how to navigate that advocacy system. So understanding where to go, understanding what questions to ask, and providing support in getting your needs met in those environments. Um, Systems are significantly different and circumstances are significantly different. So I can't give a blanket answer to that, but staff are really intent and really focused on helping people build those advocacy skills to be able to advocate for themselves, as opposed to doing advocacy on someone's behalf.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
So I'd be happy to talk to you offline at another time about things and help you brainstorm some solutions because I know a whole lot about how to navigate different systems.
I'll call you. I'll call you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I apologize, Michelle, that I didn't think independent living centers earlier when we've had conversations. So I'm glad that you are connecting with Jason. That sounds really
All good. All good.
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a shortage of affordable
Yeah,
housing, and for those with disabilities who are younger and can work, that is absolutely a significant issue. And as we talk about housing as our advocacy focus for the next 3 years, that's one of the things I really think about. In another life, I worked in the bureaucracy, and I have a lot of experience with affordable housing. And one of my big rubs is that when you talk to affordable housing advocates, they only talk about affordability. They never talk about accessibility, and they never put the two together. And what they say is if things are affordable, well, then you can just make it accessible without thinking about the fact that accessibility costs a lot of money. Um, so we're really looking at how we develop more housing opportunities around the communities and how we bridge work done at the federal level to work done at the local level, not even the state level, because they really operate as a pass through. Because so much housing decision making is done at a micro local level. And that's one of the things that we're really focused on connecting because I think that's a huge barrier. Next, oh, thank you, Tim. Um, I'd also like to point people to the IL Wisconsin website, which has a list of all the independent living centers in the state. You can look it up by your zip code, and it will tell you who your independent living center is. I'll post that. Oh, I'll post that to everyone. Thank you, Tim. ilwith.net independent living centers. You can use that to find your local independent living center. Other comments and questions?
I know the other one. So the top two that I get that I don't have any, usually I can find resources and people and it's like, okay, we can solve this. Housing is one of those issues. The other is transportation, especially in our rural areas around Wisconsin. And people are kind of, I think secretly hoping that automated driving cars will suddenly be everywhere. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. But that's the other issue that I know families talk about is their children, their young adults with disabilities, especially being able to get places to work, to play, to where they want to go. And it's just really hard when they don't drive.
Yeah, I mean, transportation is a huge barrier, and it's a barrier in rural communities for just about everyone who has a disability. Um, I don't have a lot of resources for transportation. That's another really challenging structure. what I will say is it's important and valuable to speak up about those concerns because there can be some action taken systemically at the state level to make some of that easier. One of the big barriers I hear about from the community is the what I call geofencing of services, right? That a paratransit provider can't leave their county to provide services and you can't cross boundaries. It's even so bad that here in Madison, when the Independent Living Center moved locations, they moved to a spot that they thought would be fantastically accessible. It's right across the street from a giant grocery store, from a Woodman's. It's right next to what was a transfer point where all the buses would come and line up, but it wasn't actually in the city of Madison. It was in the town of Blooming Grove and didn't have sidewalk connection because Blooming Grove wouldn't pay for sidewalk. And because Blooming Grove wouldn't contract for paratransit services, Tim can see where this is going. Paratransit wouldn't drop people off in Access to Independence's parking lot. Absolutely an oversight, but a huge issue all the same. And when we tried to address it at the local level with advocacy, they pointed us to a state law that prohibited transportation agencies from operating in non-participating jurisdictions. So now we have a state law that was intended to not have people who aren't paying for a service use it, create a barrier to people's independence. Um, and one of the things that I really talk a lot about and probably beat to death when I'm talking to people is something called the Olmsted decision. And this is hands down the most significant Supreme Court decision for people with disabilities in the history. What the Olmsted decision created was an obligation, and it's the obligation to use public dollars in the most integrated setting. So in education, you're used to the term least restrictive environment. This is like least restrictive environment on steroids. You have to look at what is the most you can have somebody included in non-disabled society and work back from there to determine what the most integrated setting is. And this Supreme Court decision said that because the ADA is civil rights law and says that people have the right to live in the United States the same as anyone else, using public dollars to put them in a setting less than that is discriminatory. And this decision can be used to leverage a lot of services. I'll really quick tell a story about a family who had an adult son who had a developmental disability who was living in the outskirts of town, out past Olin Drive in an area where bus transportation wasn't great. And they wanted to move him to a neighborhood here that was really walkable. The Vilas neighborhood, it's by the zoo, it's by Edgewood College. It's a fantastic neighborhood. But that neighborhood had parking restrictions, and nobody that was not a resident or anybody that was not a resident couldn't park in front of the house they wanted to purchase for more than 2 hours. So staff who would be providing services to this individual who had 24/7 care would have to leave him every 2 hours to go move their parking spot. Even though there's an exemption that exists for residents, um, the city was very firm that this applied to residents only and couldn't ever apply to any workers because it could get abused by daycare workers or home care workers or not home care workers, sorry, maids and construction workers. Like this was something that they couldn't change because the state said they couldn't. So I presented them with an Olmsted argument that said, your decision to enforce this rule about parking is leading to this individual not living in the most integrated setting where he could walk out his door and see somebody who didn't have a disability, could walk out his door and say hi to a neighbor, could walk to his parents' house. or to the store. All that's the barrier is this parking decision. And I got the city to change their mind through some advocacy efforts and proof that Olmsted was, in fact, something they could do. And we created an exemption for the city. Now, if you live in Madison and you have 24/7 care through a Medicaid program, if you live in one of those parking restricted areas, you can get an exemption to that permit process for residents and get permits for your home care workers. You have to register all of their cars and their license plates. You have to have a little hang tag with the permit on it. But because of Olmsted, we were able to change a public policy. And a lot of people, when they hear Olmsted, think it only applies to the context of long-term care and nursing home services. They don't realize that it applies to every publicly funded service out there, from education to employment to long-term care to housing. If they receive public dollars, you can use Olmsted as some leverage to hopefully make some policy change. And the more people that know that, the more successful that policy change is going to be.
Other questions or conversations or just topics of, what's important to families that are out there? And I totally acknowledge we've hit the middle of December, so it's worth acknowledging.
Well, if there isn't anything more, I really appreciate you all inviting me to talk about what it is we do, to talk a little bit about my passion, disability justice, to educate people about Olmsted, which I always love doing. Um, yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Give me, you guys know the drill by now. Don't go away too fast here. Here we go. Oh, come on, chat. Before you exit, please feel free to exit through the survey so that we know how we are doing. So now that that's posted, Jason, thank you so much. And I could tell you that as my ears perked up as working with healthcare transition and working with the different partners in education and employment about how having someone understand accommodations, understand their own health, understand how that impacts their employment, how foundational health is to success in higher education and employment. I think we're going to need to have some further conversations in 2025 and work on this whole transition and helping our kids successfully transition into adulthood.
Yeah,
Um,
that's been a huge focus of the centers. I'll I'll plug it because we just found out, but at the transition conference in February, Pam Jensen from DPI, Meredith Dressel from
mhm.
DPR, and I are going to be doing a presentation, or no, it might be Sarah Keene who's doing the presentation with us.
With DVR.
Yeah. Um, I think they switched it. We're going to be doing a presentation about those partnerships and
That
about
is
the
that is
collective work,
great.
advocacy and service wise that we're doing between DPI, DVR, and the independent living centers. So if you can make it, we'd love to see you there.
Oh, I will be there and I will, if I'm not somewhere else, I will be in that session because I'm always trying to figure out who are the partners to make sure that health is included in the conversation and healthcare is included in the conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, again, Jason and everybody else, thank you so much for being here. As somebody sent me today, happy holidays, happy normal days, happy whatever days you want to have. Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully I'll be able to see y'all again in 2025. Bye-bye.